Welcome to the February 4th edition of the SBO Developer Weekly Meeting. This week we have a number of new guests from IBM, David, Zhao, Paul, who will be joining us. They are part of the Maximal team that's working and looking to use SBO. So we'll be looking to ask if they could share some details about how they're looking to use SBO and or what challenges they have later on in the call. So just, welcome guys. Thank you for joining. So this is something that we've kind of started earlier this year. Just wanting to kind of connect with users of SBO to kind of understand what they're doing, what their challenges are, and to look for involvement as part of an open source project to contribute towards this, to making this better for all the users, right? So, first off, thank you for joining and welcome. And welcome. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to raise it. Or feel free to raise items to our agenda so that we can cover on our weekly calls. Just, I guess, as a standing note, we typically have like a bit of a weekly schedule in terms of what topics to discuss, but please feel free to add any agenda items to the future meetings if that you want to bring up or want to discuss. Okay, and if you have any questions or feedback or concern, please feel free to reach out back to me or the service mining operator email address. I would definitely collect any feedback from there. Right. Any questions or concerns at the moment? Okay, so maybe I'd like to start is, David, would you mind doing some introductions? Maybe just give us an introduction to who you are, what your team is, and what you're working on, and how you're looking to use SBO. Yeah, great, thank you.
Yeah, so I'm David Parker. I'm development lead for IBM Maximal Application Suite. So this is a new offering from IBM that launched April last year, and we're transitioning to using the service binding operator to basically power the internals of MAS in our Generation 1 product. There was a lot of manual copying of secrets and config maps across different namespaces, so that the different parts of the suite all shared a common configuration. We looked at what we needed to do to improve this, and we kind of came up with the concept of SBO as, this is something we need to implement. And by chance, we stumbled across the SBO project and thought, great, someone's already solved this problem for us. And we've been busy sort of looking at how we can integrate this into the suite ever since.
How far along are you in the adoption, if you don't mind me asking?
So we just released 8.3 last week. Our next release, which is going to be in April, we hope to be powered by the service binding operator. So there's obviously a number of caveats to that. I mean, the primary one is the issues with the out of memory problems when it's in a cluster with a lot of namespaces and a lot of things managing. We have a contingency plan in place so that if those issues are still present by the time we need to GA, we'll be able to exist without SBO, but it's going to lose a lot of the value for us. The primary thing SBO brings us is that when someone changes a piece of configuration in the suite, the goal of the suite is that you set that once and you don't need to set it in the 6 different applications that are in the suite. What we have today is once you change that, you need to go and prod every application and say, hey, wake up, go and check with the core system and refresh the configuration of DB2 or Mongo or whatever it happens to be. With SBO, that all happens automatically, which is exactly what we want, and that's what we're really hoping to get out of this.
Perfect. Thank you. Any questions or comments from anybody else on the call? Okay. Well, welcome. Yeah, I think I'm not sure if you guys are available or ready to do this, but it would be great if either in this call or maybe a future call, it would be great to see some demos in terms of how you're leveraging it, because I think it would be great for the team to hear and see that if possible. So
I mean, I've got a quick deck that we've used for other teams in IBM to explain how we're using SBO. I could try stick that up on a screen share. I've not really done screen shares on iPads before, but I can see if I can get it working.
Yeah, if you can, that'll be great. It'd be great to see that.
So can you see the box thing? Oh, cool, it works. So as we've moved to Gen 2, we've basically introduced a load of new technologies into MAS. And the big one for us is this service binding operator. So this summarizes what we're really using it for, right? So it's about discovering the general configuration of the MAS instance across a number of applications. So if you think of what MAS is, we have got 6 or 7 IBM products that before were all completely independent things. If you wanted to deploy them, you had to configure each one of those completely independently, and a lot of that configuration was the same information. The goal of the suite is you can configure stuff once, and once you've done that piece of work, you should be able to pretty much do one-click deploy of all these other applications. So the benefits to us is it makes it much easier to sell new products to customers, because once they've gone through all the pain once to get that first in there, if they're going to add application 2, they should be able to do that much easier than rather than having to start from 0 when they're on application 2. And obviously for customers, the benefit for them is it's much easier for them to manage and maintain these apps. So there's a number of ways we use that, but we're also using it in an effort to sort of across IBM say, not just within our product do we want to use service binding operator, we want to use service binding operator as the way for IBM products to talk to each other. So outside of MAS, there's a number of products that we need to integrate with. So business analytics service, a suite licensing service. Before SBO, the customer would have to come in, enter a load of credentials, they'd have to go and load up those services, read some config file, and then copy paste that config when they set up MAS. What we're doing now is getting those services to expose a service binding endpoint, and then all they need to do is tell MAS the service is in this namespace and it's got this name, and everything can just automatically discover each other. And everyone that we've shown this to, they absolutely love it, because it's just making the deployment of these products so much easier, which is what we've been telling customers the whole time, is what justifies the additional expense of bringing OpenShift into the picture. We keep telling them it's going to make your lives easier, more simple. And this is one of the key technologies that's actually allowing us to show them, meaningful improvements to their life when they want to deploy and manage IBM products. So to give an idea of what actually MAS is, we're using a strategy of single namespace operators. We want to be able to support multiple instances of MAS going into a single cluster, and each application within each instance of the suite basically lives in its own namespace and shouldn't go out of its namespace. And that's where the SBO comes in, because that's what allows all the different applications that each stay within their namespace to reach out to the other applications and be able to integrate with each other and communicate. So this is kind of like a high level picture of what MAS looks like in the upcoming 8.4 release. So we've got in the bottom left corner there, we've got one of the applications in MAS. So there's another 6 or 7 of those that basically the same way. We've got the core part of MAS down in the bottom right. At the top right, we've got something that isn't part of MAS. It's one of the IBM products that MAS needs to talk to. And then at the cluster level, we've got obviously certificate manager and the service binding operator. So when we're looking at how we're trying to use SBO, it breaks down into these 2 categories, right? Within MAS, we want to use the service binding operator to let all of these namespace scoped applications be able to communicate with each other without having to grant them cluster-wide powers. The only thing that has the cluster-wide powers here is the service binding operator that acts as the middleman for being able to pass information between applications and between the core. And then, like we said before as well, we also are pushing this, across IBM to say that this is a much better way to have two different applications or two different services communicate to each other and establish that integration, rather than having a customer have to look up what an API key is, what the URL is. Just have the customer say, it's in this namespace, it's called this, and use the service binding operator to transfer the necessary information across. So one of the examples of how we're using this, right? Every application in MAS needs to manage its own certificates. We don't want every application in MAS to manage its own cluster issuer. That would be pointless, because the goal of this is that it's a unified suite, and all the certificates should be signed by the same CA. So what happens is that application creates a service binding to the main suite, and part of the binding contract is the piece of information that says this is the name of the cluster issuer. So at that point, the application can now set up its certificates using the cluster issuer. In the old model, in Gen 1, in what we've released currently, what we're doing is having processes that effectively copy the properties that are in that suite custom resource spec into the custom resource spec of the managed application. And that's where we're having trouble, is that we've got to put processes in place that maintain that, so when you change it in the suite, it gets passed down to all the applications. And that's what SBO does for us. It takes away that problem. We don't need to implement something ourselves to do that. So when we look at what we're looking for what the priorities of our team, when we think, what do we want SBO to be doing? See, the first one is stability and performance, because we want to get this out to customers and have them actually benefiting from this as soon as possible. I think the next highest thing on our list is, we really want to be able to control more about the binding. The main reason for this is we would like this change to SBO to be completely invisible to all the applications in the suite. But to do that, we need to be able to use SBO to create secrets that look exactly the same as the secrets they were using before. And it doesn't make any difference to them whether those were created via our horrible copy-paste processes that were driven via API calls, or whether it's driven by the SBO dynamically doing all this for us. We would also like to be able to code objects as YAML. That's the main way we pass complex configuration data around the systems today. We encode the object as a YAML string that goes into a property in either a secret or a config map. Then when that gets mounted into a container, they've got a YAML file they can work with. Whereas what we're using today, the result we get is this, what you're seeing now on the right. And again, that just comes down to we would like this change to be completely transparent to all of the application teams that we're working with. And finally, we would like to be able to use config maps and secrets. It just gives us a bit more flexibility in how the binding is represented. And this is more of a longer term thought process. Service bindings do exactly what we want, but they only do exactly what we want when everything is in the same cluster. And that's great for us today. But one of the things we're being pushed on and challenged by our execs and offering managers is, well, okay, let's think longer term. And these IBM systems, and maybe they're not in the same cluster anymore. Can we achieve these same savings that you're talking about in terms of the simplicity of managing the integration of system A and system B? Can we do that if they're not in the same cluster somehow? And we don't know whether the answer is great, that's something SBO could do, as an extra capability, or whether it's a completely different problem that we need to find someone else has already solved this, but it's just something that we've started thinking about. And that's the end.
Great, thank you. Did anybody have any questions? Thank you for sharing, David. This is actually very interesting.
Yeah, this is a great presentation and great overview of how you want to use it. Regarding a couple of issues you pointed out, you would like to be introduced or fixed. Just would like to ask you, would you like to kind of help us with some of them and contribute some of the code fixes for them? I mean, certainly some of the things that are already on our radar, but if you would like to help, that would be really beneficial for everybody. So, because just our days are also 24 hours only.
Yeah, I know that all too well. I think that the problem is our dev team is not experienced with Go. We're primarily Java and Python development. So we have started taking a poke around the SBO code just to familiarize ourselves with what it's doing and how it's working. But I think it might be a while before anyone here
sure,
is
but at least
to put something in.
To kind of, yeah. But what will be definitely valuable is some of the things you pointed out are already there in some form, but it would be valuable to do the reality check with you. So if this is going the direction you see as the valuable, so that we can actually, orientate it ourselves early enough and not really to implement something which is not then useful, right? So like you mentioned in the slides, that the binding of the secrets in the config max. So this is right now undocumented, but possible. But we would like also, it would be good that we can check, say with you, if this is how it's broken now is okay, or we need to improve this. So for example, right?
Yeah, we're definitely looking to get more involved and have more of a to and fro. This is basically a key technology for us now. That's part of the reason to bring so many people from across our dev team onto this call, because I've been working with SBO for 9 months, maybe a bit more now, but for most of the team, this is a new technology that they've only really been introduced to in the last few months. So yeah, we're hoping to get everyone much more up to speed on this and be able to contribute to those kinds of discussions. And
would it be possible for you to share the link to the slides in the agenda doc, just for later references?
Yeah. If you want, feel free to share. Send the presentation to me, and I can host it and share it within our space.
Okay.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Any other? Yeah. Thank you so much. Any other questions, comments? Okay. So for today's agenda, we have an item. Akash will be presenting to us the work that he's been doing regarding adding implementation for a flexible naming strategy. So Akash, I'd like to hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jasper. So I'll just quickly present my screen. Is it visible?
Painting. Yep. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so before starting the demo, I'll just set the context, what we have been doing as a part of setting a flexible naming strategy. So at the moment, right now, we basically, when we create a service binding request, we have an intermediate secret created by service binding operator, which lists out all the binding names. Basically, they contains the environment variable, key value pairs. So the way we prepare this is like, currently we have the service kind uppercase _ binding name. So that is the default name we generate as a part of reconciliation loop. But so right now we don't have specific customization options available to update that. Currently we can just provide the prefixes, maybe the name prefix or global name prefix, something like that. But now with this PR, we can specify the naming strategy. So right now it's in the under the service, but basically it's a root of spec, so where we can define it at the global level, and we can specify the Go template. We can have like service kind, upper scale, and there we have a few functions which we can apply to the string. Like we can uppercase the string, we can lowercase, or we can title case the string. So these are the options currently available. Yeah, so there are few naming strategies currently defined. Like one is a none. If we specify naming strategy as a none, so whatever the binding name specified in the CSV descriptor or annotation is there, that is going to be within the intermediate secret. And if we specify the default name, it basically has the so this one is kind of obsolete now. I mean, this is not the format we are using. I'll just open up the updated doc. So yeah, so right now we have an application here. We can see then the services, and we can specify the naming strategy like this. So we can have like prefix or suffix, and in between that we can have Go template itself specifying the service detail or the binding name detail. So once we have this naming strategy, ultimately we are going to, and we are thinking that we will be having like host and port. These are the two binding names exposed. So when we run the reconcile loop with this naming strategy, we are basically going to have these two different variable binding names generated or populated within the intermediate secret. So database here is the service kind. Here we can see this is the kind, and we are uppercasing it. So this is what we are seeing here. And the host is nothing but the binding name, which is being uppercased as well. And then we are putting up the suffix. So this is what we are saying when we apply this particular naming strategy. So based on this, like there can be multiple application, multiple services who are exposing in the specific format, and that format can be defined here in the service binding request. So yeah, so I think I'll just start with the demo so that it will be clear for all the folks. Okay, so right now I already have one service binding request created. I'll show the request itself, the spec field. Okay, so within the spec right now we have application defined and the service defined. So this database needs to be connected to this deployment. And right now we don't have any naming strategy defined. It's just like nothing. So what will happen in this case? In this case, we are going to create the default naming, which we have currently, which is basically a combination of this kind and the binding name, uppercase. So I'll just go ahead to the intermediate secret, which are created. Yeah. So these are the secret binding names. Database is again the service kind in the capital, and underscore we have the binding name. So this is what the default format is currently, if we haven't specified any naming strategy. So there are few things, like if we want to bind the environment variable as a file, then we specify we basically lowercase all the binding names, and we don't keep the service kind. So I'll just show the demo, that would be easier. So I'll just go ahead, and I'm not going to set any naming strategy again. I'll just bind it as a files, and let's make it true. So now instead of setting the environment variables, we are actually mounting the file. and let's check the environment variables. Now here we can see all the binding names are lowercase. So this is what will get populated within the application container. So application will have access to these files. Yeah, and now if we want to set particular naming strategy, we can do that as well. So let's say like we want to set something prefix, then I want the binding name as well, and I want it to be uppercase. And so let's add like some suffix. If I save it, we should have the secret defined in that particular format. Yeah, so we have the prefix and the binding name in the capital and the suffix. So this is how we can specify. And I'll show the few naming strategies. So here we can specify in Go template as well as few predefined strategies. So one of them is none, where we don't apply any string functions on the binding name. So whatever is defined in the annotation or in the CSV descriptor, that will get populated. Okay. So if we see, we should see the binding name, what they are in the CSV descriptor or annotations. So here we can see that there is no any string function applied. This is, we have picked it from the annotation binding name itself. So these are like three things we can do. Like if we want to bind it as a files, it gets lowercase. Then we can also apply the custom naming, and there are few predefined naming strategies, and one of them is like none. And we can have more naming strategies if we want. But anyways, we can customize it here itself using the Go template. So I think that's all about the demo. Let me know if you guys have any question.
Thanks, Akash. And then to this, just want to kind of share a bit more light. So the motivation for this PR and then this functionality, the actual like naming scheme is pretty much rigid. So you have either, so the binding names are uppercase and prefixed with a kind name. And for the many existing application, this is not the layout they can consume. In order to open a possibility to keep existing applications and simply inject the bindings under the names they expect, that's the kind of motivation for introducing possibility to customize the naming strategies. Also, this is interesting for the people who would like to inject bindings as files, which is the only way according to the spec. So right now, until we don't merge this PR, even the file names are uppercased and prepended with the kind names, so having possibility to say that there is no naming strategy or we don't apply name strategy, it moves us closer to the behavior which is defined in the spec itself.
Great, thank you. Any other questions or comments at this point?
This looks great to me. How soon can we start using it?
Yeah, the idea is that we, as we talked the beginning of these calls, we would like to have releases every 3 weeks. So hopefully this PR is going to be merged by the beginning of the next week, and with that we are going to release a 0.5 version containing this feature.
Brilliant.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. There's one other item that we wanted to bring up for today's call. The group API change. Predrag, did you want to take us through that?
Yeah, I mean, share I just let me know if I need to share my screen, because there is no any particular, there is an issue visible for everybody. But yeah, let me share the screen quickly. Can you see my screen? Okay,
Right.
it's coming, right?
Yep.
Okay, good.
Yep.
So I have created this issue just shortly before the meeting, so I know that you could actually take a look on your own. But we have stumbled upon following issues during this week. So we are working on a PR which should review or like prevent privilege escalations for the malicious user or user who are not having permissions to access given services, so that, or applications, so that we would like to prevent them to establish service binding because between those. And in order to implement this, we need to introduce a webhook which needs to gather the username or like user info from about the submitter of the request. And this is all fine and good, but we have stumbled on the limitation that the current group name we use is operator.coreos.com, and that kind of group is particularly guarded in OLM, Operator Lifecycle Manager, and the manager doesn't allow to establish webhooks for that particular group name. The reasoning behind is the following: so if you're able to do so, you would potential malicious user would able to establish webhooks and really make a cluster unusable. For example, you could change the cluster service version objects in the cluster and replace deployments with whatever images and so on. So, in order to continue resume our work on a privilege escalation issue, we need to change the API group name. That's that's officially breaking API change. But given the fact that we are not really changing anything on the field level of the service binding, the change for the consumer is relatively simple. So instead of using the current group name in your service binding resources, you are going to update just that, and everything will work as before. So this is what I wanted to share with the group. This is coming, and hopefully we are going to have a PR ready soon. I mean like these days, and the idea is also to the next release contain that change, so that we can actually adapt early enough before going to GA and not to surprise anybody. Do you have any questions about this? It's unfortunate, but this is how it is. So
Okay. Thank you, Predrag. Any other questions or any questions on this topic? Okay. Thank you all. Did anybody have any other items for the roundtable, or like they would like to share? Okay, perfect. Well, David.
Wait. I was trying to find the mute button. So just for David, am I still?
Yep, you're here.
Okay. The noise went away. So David, we introduced, I guess, some folks from IBM introduced the number of the number of workers, right? That led to bad performance. So we've done an investigation, and that basically what we were executing the process with one worker thread, right? And we need to increase that. So if you take a look on whatever we have in master, probably there's either we have to implement a switch, or I guess your colleagues already have done that to mitigate that, because the biggest issue that happens when running service binding operator on a cluster directly, a cluster wide process, is that it receives currently before a patch, I guess, all of the secrets all the secrets and config maps that have been updated on the cluster. And I learned that when you listen to events on OpenShift's core namespaces, they tend to be very chatty, right? So this is one of the reasons. So please take a look and increase the threadiness. I guess I will find out the proper name on the code later on. But there's an issue especially for that. So if you add that into the number of threads being the number of cores of your process, then you should see an improved. You should have an improved experience.
Thanks for that. We'll take a look.
So sorry, I just wanted to add that because you mentioned this on your slides.
Of course. Thank you, Igor. Okay, well, thank you all for joining today. Have yourself a good rest of your day, and we'll look forward to hearing from you next time. Thank you for joining. Take care.
Thanks. Take care.
Thanks, bye.